to you, Yeshua the Messiah. Are you come to destroy?
Zümremiz. La ilahe illallah diyeceğim. Git. Stop. Çok.
You are.
Holy Lord,
is demonic possession
you
real?
who sent your only Son into this world in order that he might crush this roaring lion.
Has science already determined its mythology?
However, one thing is for sure, that this is a scientific phenomenon. When something is natural, we should believe it to be natural, rather than believing it to be supernatural or paranormal.
What do you want with me, Jesus?
In the Gospels,
Son of the Most
the
High
central
God?
figure, Jesus of Nazareth, had numerous encounters with the demonic. If we accept the Gospel as a historical document, does that mean we also have to accept the supernatural occurrences? These questions were some of the things we pondered, especially when trying to justify the production of a movie trilogy covering the combined four Gospels, with the central character, Yeshua's dialogue, untouched.
We want to present you a case study, which we will dramatize in order to protect the identity of the persons involved. The following represents a true account of a Christian man that was tempted to walk away from God after having a demonic encounter. A man was walking one day when suddenly he felt a presence on the back of his shoulders. It was a non-physical presence, and immediately said, "Satan, what are you doing back there?" To which it replied, "Didn't you tell me to get behind you?" In the Gospels, Satan tempted Yeshua to worship him, to which Yeshua replied, "You get behind me, Satan,
It's
for it
right
is
to
written."
say you for worship the Lord God Almighty, and I him one you for serve.
So, after the voice replied, he immediately began to reprimand it. And as the presence was leaving, it replied, "Don't you remember what I did to Job?" In the Old Testament, Satan approaches God about a man named Job, who Satan claimed that if Job lost everything, he would curse God. The end result? Job did not curse God despite losing everything. Now, this occurrence could have been determined to be localized to his mind, since there was no physical representation of the voice outside of it, and he can only have deemed it as such if it was not for the event that occurred later that day. And this event tempted him to walk away from God. But the good news is that he didn't walk away, but embraced the Gethsemane event, where even Jesus himself was tempted to walk away from his Father's plan. We looked for case studies like this in order to have a reference to demonic possession for the production of the teaser trailer. So not only are we determined to produce the films, but we are also determined to uncover the mysteries behind the supernatural events of the Gospels, starting with demonic possession. But where would we start? We first had to create some parameters to plug the biblical events into our reality. What does demonic possession resemble?
As a disclaimer, we are not claiming all mental health issues as a source of being demonic. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 24, there was a distinction between daimonizomai and seleniazomai, with the latter referring to mental health. But there is one mental health issue that reflects the conditions in the Gospels, and that is multiple personality disorder, which is now referred to as dissociative identity disorder. We already know the causes of many mental health issues, but does science know the exact cause of DID? Can demonic possession be ruled out as an underlying cause of such conditions? We were determined to find the answers, and we wanted unbiased answers. Someone not influenced by a belief system, and an expert in the field.
I'm Dr. Colin Ross. I've been interested in demon possession in general for a long time. And the first edition of my main textbook on multiple personality, which was called Multiple Personality Disorder, published in 1989, there's a whole opening section about the history of demon possession and how it's all over the world. It's in many, many cultures, not every culture. And the possessing entity isn't necessarily a demon. It could be an ancestor spirit or an animal spirit. But possession syndromes, there's, I know one big study, there's like 270 cultures that possession was documented in. So it's universal, just about, it's thousands of years history. But if we come forward into the Catholic Inquisition, which we're now in the 1400s, 1500s, the last witch was actually burned at the stake in Scotland in 1797. So basically, these people were, quote, demon possessed. And the treatment for them was, first of all, a diagnostic assessment, which was like dunk them in water. If they drowned, it's well. And if they survived, that was the proof that they're actually possessed by a demon. So therefore, you had to burn them at the stake. So it was a tight little role to get out of. So that was how the Catholic Church approached the problem. These are demon-possessed women, very few demon-possessed men, and the inquisitors are all males. So there's a whole history of male chauvinism involved in this. But basically, the Catholic Church had ownership of a problem. It was defined theologically. And then when we get into the 19th century, no more women being burned at the stake. Within 50, 60 years, there's a shift into now the field of psychology, psychiatry has ownership of the problem. And these people have dissociative disorders. It's not an external entity, it's part of themselves that's been split off, that they may experience as a foreign entity that's possessing them. And the therapy is psychotherapy, not being burned at the stake. The Catholic Church still continued to have experts in exorcism. They just weren't burning at the stake anymore. And then in a completely separate world, we've got psychiatry, psychology, academia. And then when we look at the DSM-3, which is the Diagnostic Manual of American Psychiatry, third edition, 1980, and then the fourth edition, 1994, possession states aren't even mentioned. They're a separate thing. They're in the appendix, they're discussed a bit. But basically it's like over there in foreign countries, and we don't have it here, and we understand it psychologically. But then in DSM-5, which came out in 2013, there was another shift, which is now the official definition is that you have these identity states, and in some cultures, it's understood as possession. So possession syndromes are now kind of incorporated in dissociative identity disorder. So it's like psychiatry is trying to take ownership of these possession states by redefining them as dissociative. Now, back on the flip side of that, in our culture, I've done some research showing that possession states in people with dissociative identity disorder are actually quite common. But what I do have experience with in a couple of papers is one study we did was just, I think it was 20 people with DID. So these people were all in Texas, all were in therapy for multiple personality disorder, and had all undergone exorcisms. So obviously they were cured, they wouldn't be in therapy. So it's a very select, small sample. But what we did is we defined coercive exorcism, non-coercive exorcism. The non-coercive exorcism was much more like psychotherapy. You get some therapeutic discussion with the entity, do some negotiation. Why is the entity there? Is the entity ready to depart? And it's kind of a voluntary departure. And then we had good outcomes and bad outcomes. The good outcomes were the symptoms resolved, the entity didn't return, person's happy. The bad outcomes were often the entity comes back, which is why exorcisms have to be done repeatedly. There's all kinds of hostility, internal conflict, anger. The person's alienated from their church and their religion and the social support that provides, and their symptoms get worse. So all of the bad outcomes were from the coercive exorcisms. All the good outcomes were the negotiated exorcisms in Anglo people in Texas. So the point of that paper was, it's not about exorcism is good or exorcism is bad, it's how you do it. And the same applies to psychotherapy. You can have horrible, bad psychotherapy that makes a person worse. There's controversy in the field. There's psychiatrists and psychologists who believe in multiple personality. There's ones who don't. And one thing that's important to be clear on is the picture of multiple personality equals dissociative identity disorder is the same. So the people who do believe in it and the people who don't believe in it agree on what the picture is, which you have these different personality states. They take turns being in control and there's some sort of amnesia. So everybody's agreed that's the picture. And the people who don't believe in it make a number of different errors of scholarship and logic. So one is, it's not possible to have more than one personality. Right, well, that's obviously true. There's not literally separate people in there. And when I explain that to a patient, I say that if there actually was little people in there, then when we took an x-ray of your head, we'd see these little skeletons in there. And if they were running around in your brain would be destroyed. So it's not literally concretely true. And nobody can debate that point. Nobody says, oh yeah, there would be little skeletons in there. But nevertheless, it's very psychologically true. And people actually do have these experiences of, they come to, they're somewhere, they don't know how they got there. With no head injury, no drugs, alcohol. And so I call that the central paradox of DID. It's real on the one hand, psychologically, but it's not literally concretely real. So it's real and not real at the same time. But the more extreme skeptics, they'll say, it's not possible to have more than one personality, which is a completely bogus argument. Nobody's saying that that's the case. Then they'll say it's just cooked up in therapy, but they don't have any actual evidence to support that, really research evidence. It's just an opinion. And you can't really debate them out of that opinion no matter what you say or do, because it's just a fixed opinion.
I know there's some case studies where some of the people that suffer with the condition would have different physical changes in their physical attributions at the presentation of the different personalities.
Right.
Changes in different diagnoses, things like diabetes, et cetera. Could you expand on some of those studies where people, however it happens, I mean, what the physical explanation could possibly be for those different manifestations of physical attribution?
I actually have a case here too. In 2015, doctors in Germany reported a case of a woman who suffered from what is traditionally called multiple personality disorder. Basically, one of her personalities had legal blindness. And they did brain scans. And when that personality came up, she was legally blind. When the personality was gone, she wasn't blind anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So we know that the human mind is a very complicated, very amazing thing. And what is it that the human mind is capable of? Well, we don't know the limits of that exactly. But sort of at the rumor level and the folklore level, there's the idea that people with multiple personality, one personality can have a disease and the other one doesn't have it. So obviously that's not literally true if we're talking about a broken bone. There can't be one personality that has a fractured, whatever, humerus and the other one doesn't. So there's a limit on that. And one personality can have liver cancer and the other one doesn't. So that's just impossible. So what is possible? Well, you could certainly have one alter personality who's scared, frightened, in a flashback, pulse is 140, adrenaline flowing all over the place. And you could take all kinds of measurements to prove that. And then you just switch to another personality, all that goes away. But that's not any more amazing and surprising than, oh, excuse me, I have to stop now. A lion just crashed through the door of this office. My pulse is going to go up. So the differences in physiological state between alter personalities have not been proven to be outside the range of normal variation in people. If they're in a fear state, an anger state, a sleep state, whatever. And so sometimes this gets a little bit overhyped. But on the other hand, people with different alter personalities can look different. It really seems like it's a different person sometimes. They're just their whole manner, subtleties of their facial musculature, their posture, their tone of voice, everything really changes quite dramatically. The question then is, could a good actor copy that? Well, we know from Hollywood that good actors can do that. But they're also like top level trained actors. Can just regular people fake that convincingly? Probably for a little while, but I don't think for months and months and months and months. The average person can't keep all the information straight to keep faking it consistently. And so it's a combination of people can look very different. It's kind of like the mom who, the baby's trapped in a burning car, so she like flips the car over sort of thing. So some of that is just exaggerated folklore, but when there's an emergency, you can really become the Hulk, so to speak, just a normal person, because your adrenaline's up, you're in fight mode. So there's endless examples of changes of physiological state. People with DID can do that, but is it impossible for somebody without DID to do that? Most of the time, probably not. You don't suddenly switch psychological state that dramatically in relationship to some cue or trigger. But you actually do if you have post-traumatic stress disorder. So you can have a combat vet, he's normal day, everything's fine, his physiology is level, and the helicopter goes overhead, and all of a sudden he's in a completely different psychophysiological state. So again, but PTSD and DID are kind of closely related to each other. So you have these dramatic switches of state that most people don't have, which is true, it's a real switch of state, but it's not outside the range of normal for somebody who's been through trauma. If you go blind, that's called a conversion disorder in the mental health field. So I've interviewed people where there's absolutely nothing wrong with their eyes. They've been thoroughly analyzed psychologically. Neurologists have seen them, they've had scans and so on. And they're blind, and they've only been blind for the last 3 days. Nothing happened. And you could threaten to poke them in the eye, and they don't blink, they don't flinch, nothing. So they're actually experiencing being blind. But it's a conversion disorder. By definition, there's nothing wrong with the person. It's all psychological. Or they can be deaf, or they cannot feel anything from the waist down, or they can't move their right arm. All of this has been recognized for more than 100 years in psychiatry. So, but it's all psychological. It's not baffling and out of the range of normal.
So, does modern scientific research exclude the possibility of demonic possession as a cause of DID?
Well, it's logically impossible to exclude demonic possession scientifically. How would you do that? Proving a negative is very hard. So I think that it's actually the other way around. The burden is on people who say it is a demon. What evidence do you have other than your belief system? And so I don't think that's an outside science problem. I think it's outside current science. But my point of view is, it's not whether I believe or don't believe. If I was going to do research to try and demonstrate that there actually are spirits or demons or entities of some kind that don't have physical bodies, but they can intrude inside a person, well, first thing I would think is, okay, if those things exist, they have to have some sort of energy signature. Otherwise, they couldn't exist. So if they have some kind of energy signature, okay, what kind of energy is it? Is it electromagnetic field of some kind within our current physics? Or is it some form of energy that we just haven't figured out physics-wise yet? Because if spirits exist in the universe, then they're real. They've got to have some sort of energy signature. But if they exist, and you can figure out what their energy signature is, then you should be able to scan that somehow and show, okay, here it is, and now it's over here inside the person. So if they are real, and if they do exist, they've got to be demonstrable scientifically somehow.
Run it through a few filters and see, maybe even Carillion photography, you know, the guy that
Something.
did.
Yeah. And it's just angry parts of themselves that are holding normal anger from being abused as kids. And then when you try and do an exorcism, it just creates more alienation, more conflict, and ramps up the internal hatred and makes things worse. So it's possible that it could be a demon, but it's possible that it's just a dissociated, angry, hostile part of the self. If that's the case, the go-away demon approach is going to make things worse. Maybe it's just a human being who's angry at the church who's been abused by a priest. So I'm open to exorcism as a therapeutic ritual to resolve dissociative disorders in other cultures.
So let's review the information. Science cannot disprove demonic possession, but can it prove it? Extraordinary abilities from dissociative identity disorder is explained by the capabilities of the human mind. Whether it is blindness or extraordinary strength, these things can be explained naturally. So DID is a mental health issue, but it reflects the condition described in the Gospels.
Jesus, Son of the Most High God, what do you want with me? I beg you, don't punish me.
Could the Gospels have gotten it wrong? Was Jesus in error by referring to such conditions as demonic?
The burden is on people who say it is a demon. What evidence do you have other than your belief system?
Rather than believing it to be supernatural.
But if they exist, and you can figure out what their energy signature is.
If it was an energy source, we should have detected it by now, but there is no evidence. Is this why people become atheists? Wait! The man with the demonic encounter. He was told something bad will happen later that day, and something did happen that day. The man could not have known. It's not an energy source. It's information. It's information that exists outside of the mind. We have been approaching this wrong. Demonic possession is not a mental health issue, such as DID, but it can appear as such. The criteria is when one obtains information that is not known to the person's mind, such as a future event. In the book of Acts, Paul encountered such an individual.
Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit by which she predicted the future.
Outside information.
She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting,
"These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved."
She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so troubled that he turned around and said to the spirit,
"In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her."
So why are we determined to prove that demonic possession is real? To be able to not only find answers, but a cure. The real cure. Because if demons are down here with us, then that means God is above us all. And if God is above us, and He's also with us.